Welcome to Left of Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. We're joined today by Mr. Pierce Freelon, musician, professor, social entrepreneur, undergraduate degree from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, a graduate degree, master's degree in Pan-African Studies from Syracuse University. He is the founder of Black Space, a digital marker space where young people learn about music, film, and coding. He's also the frontman of the jazz hip-hop band The Beast, and also the co-founder of an Emmy Award-winning PBS series, The Beatmaking Lab, and he's joining us here today as part of his campaign for the mayor of Durham, North Carolina. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. You just named all the accolades. I'm feeling myself right now.
So if folks are doing a little Google search and they're trying to figure out what and who Pierce Freelon is, you know, what would you tell them?
I would tell them to check out Black Space. Black Space, I feel like is at the core, really touches on a lot of the core of my being, like working with kids, Afrofuturism, creative collaborations that go from the past to the present, and just kind of different stuff. We have the program on there called Street Griot. That's our like street puppetry program where we're working with kids from the East Durham Children's Initiative with Jaghetto, who did the puppets in Missy Elliott and Pharrell's video, WTF. We're teaching them how to do puppets. We're making short films. We are sending kids, young poets, to Brave New Voices, which is the biggest youth poetry competition in the world. We sent 6 black girls from Durham to San Francisco this summer, off the strength of like poetry performances where we passed the hat at BU Cafe. Durham made that happen. So it's really, you know, an accessible black tech space, right, for the community. As you think about a vision for an urban entity like Durham or others like Durham, talk about the importance of spaces like that for a community, right? We know about the kind of discrepancy in terms of the presence of young black folks or even older black folks, right? In the tech industries, you know, we're more apt to create literally apps, you know, as opposed to thinking about more hardware and firmware, you know, which is really where much of the money and the influence is. You know, as a city goes through a transition like a city like Durham, you know, talk about how important it is to have a black tech space like that. It's vital. I think that you know, Durham likes to think of itself as the Silicon Valley of the South. Some of the words I've heard thrown around, and you know, Silicon Valley is very, you know, it's a white male dominated space, and Durham is a very diverse and rich space, and to own that, it's not just diversity as a token thing. We need equitable access to these resources that the American Undergrounds and others are bringing in. And so what we did in collaboration with American Underground is we took a room that was going to be a conference room. It was in a suite of conference rooms. There's 4 conference rooms above us. This was going to be number 5. And so for all intents and purposes, it's a redundant use of space. And when we went in there and we transformed it, we brought in a muralist from Oakland to come paint this beautiful Afrofuturist mural. We had Apple come in and donate some equipment. We took a room that was going to be we actually split a wall that was going to be a dressing room for the clothing store Runaway. We're like, we're going to take a little bit of your real estate to make that an audio booth, you know, that's padded the walls with African fabrics so that we can do recording sessions and surrounded by the energy of our ancestors. If we don't have, if we don't claim space, because they're not going to if we don't take space, you know, then we'll be erased out of the scene. And you can see that happening in downtown, you know, Batala, the Afro-Brazilian band is trying to take public space by performing, you know, over there at the Durham, where the Durham Farmers Market is, at Durham Central Park, you know. And what happens with some of this growth and some of this development is that, you know, we're erased, we're pushed out, we are displaced from space. So Black Space is important, Batala is important. We do a cipher every Friday, that's important. It's important to claim space so that we're not erased.
I mean, there's a way in which what you just described is an even broader metaphor for the black working class and the black poor in Durham. For those who remember what 5 points looked like even 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And some of the population that is, for lack of a better way to describe it, been removed. Yeah. And we don't necessarily have a clear sense of where they've been removed to, right? And we know that's a pattern that we see in so many cities that go through gentrification. Yeah. What do you say to, this older guard, this traditional electorate in Durham? Again, you're talking about a historically black city.
Yeah.
What do you say about those folks who've been kind of pushed even further? Say about them and say to them.
Yeah.
Those folks have been pushed in the margins with all this wonderful development that we see downtown. Yeah. Which in part, you represent the vitality of that. And of course, this is a question that should not only be asked to you and all the other candidates, but it needs to be asked to Duke,
yeah.
In terms of the real estate that they take up. But what do you say to those populations and about those populations who are being forced to the margins?
Yeah, that's a great question. In 2011, 12 or so, I was in the St. Teresa neighborhood when a lot of those houses were being condemned.
Right.
There were blocks of a dozen houses where, there's one person still holding out.
Right.
5 houses to the left of you, 4 to the right of you, condemned, ready to be bulldozed. Now those houses, it's a new tax bracket just springing up from out of there over the ashes, on the bones of our ancestors, the way I think about it.
Right.
Now down the street on Lakewood Avenue, there's a mural of that Black Wall Street mural that's been around since 1999, painted by Emily Weinstein. And that mural is peeling. It's big swaths of paint just peeling off the wall, which is an incredibly disturbing metaphor for what's happening in the community. And so when I went, I was canvassing the streets, kind of asking people. There were some folks sitting out on their porch, like, what's happening, and they kind of talked about, the people are just coming in like with big checks, offering to buy people's houses up.
Right.
There are other people who are utilizing the system to push people out, finding ways that they haven't done something they were supposed to do, and threatening and coercing them to move out. A lot of these people, they don't have the protections or the adequate, to hire a lawyer to defend them in a situation like that. There's over 800 evictions a month in Durham, North Carolina. Wow. 800 evictions a month. So the assault on working class families is real. And so when we were canvassing in MacDougall Terrace, this is a topic of conversation. A lot of people want to know, in addition to what things we can do as it relates to affordable housing, it's like, where can I get a job? Like, I need to work.
Right.
All these new tech jobs, you've got the highest wages in the state. Those jobs aren't for us.
Open to us, right?
So we need to do a better job, like working other parts of the market, like beyond tech, manufacturing, and other areas where we can employ people so that they can afford to live in
and
their
even
house.
if they're working in the service economy, right? Pay them a more livable wage, right? I mean, that's what the Fight for 15 is about.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Living wages and what Maya Angelou calls, what we need to be working towards is work that makes use of your talents but does not degrade your dignity. Yeah. That's how she articulates it in her poem, A Pledge to Our Youth. Yeah. And that's something that I've been thinking a lot about in collaboration with some economists right here at Duke. I've been talking with Sandy Darity and Mark Paul about, they've been talking about a federal jobs guarantee for a long time. Right. And we're looking at a jobs guarantee model at the municipal level for right here in Durham. For those two reasons, it's not just it's that makes use of your talents but does not degrade your dignity, that pays you a living wage, and that deals with the intersecting nature of class, race, gender. Right. These things are you can't fix what's happening with gentrification just dealing with affordable housing. You need to deal with public safety. You need to deal with jobs. Right. You need to deal with education. So we need to work with the county. We need to work with with the police and with the sheriff. Right.
With the university.
With the university, right? With the tech sector, and I think that I'm uniquely poised to be a a unifier that can bring stakeholders to the table. And you know, to go back a little bit to your earlier question, what I tell to people, you know, who've been displaced is come to Black Space and have your voice heard. Like, come huddle with us, and through art and culture and technology, let's give some legs and some voice and some platform to some of the issues that are impacting our community.
You're aware of the criticism. I mean, you're out there, so you know what folks are saying, right? You're also deeply connected to the social media infrastructure. There's a lot of skepticism for any candidate, right, that traditional voters don't see as someone who's seasoned, who has leadership on some level in terms of governing and what have you. And I'm sure the two criticisms that you probably hear the most are, one, he's too young, and two, he's an artist. Deal with both of those questions about your candidacy. You know, the idea that you might be too young and or too experienced, or the fact that someone who's a creative, right, that you might not necessarily have the fortitude, right, to do the kind of day-to-day governing that comes with leading a municipality.
Yeah, well, you know, a lot of people think I'm a lot younger than I actually
are,
am,
right?
You know?
Right. Your family, right, got those good genes, right?
It's a rare case where black don't crack, like, has serious implications for your ability to judge the public. So first of all, I would say, you know, I come with a tremendous amount of experience. I'm the youngest person to be appointed by the governor to serve on the board of the North Carolina Arts Council. I'm on the board of the been on the board of the National Museum of Art, the Durham Library Foundation, Kids Notes. You know, so I come with that kind of executive board of director experience. I've been a professor for 10 years at UNC Chapel Hill in the departments of music and African American Studies. I've also taught at North Carolina Central University in the political science department. So, and you know, while I was teaching in those departments, I was also the youngest member on the faculty there. It's like a theme here, you know? And so when I was at UNC, one of the things that, you know, while a lot of my colleagues were, you know, researching and lecturing, writing, you know, I have a, you know, social entrepreneurship brain. One of the things I was able to accomplish as the youngest faculty member in the Department of Music was raising money, bringing stakeholders and resources to the table. I identified a grant that the U.S. State Department was offering to create an international hip-hop
and a beat-making
diplomacy program. And Beatmaking Lab was already rolling at that point. We used that as a model to create Next Level, which brought $1 million to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. You know, at 27, 28 years old. So, you know, I come with a lot of experiences that I think will be really relevant to holding this office. And then also, all I have to do to challenge the naysayers who challenge my youth is think about what activists in the black radical tradition and what ages they have been. The Greensboro Four, 18, 19 years old, sitting down at the Woolworth counter.
King's 26.
26. At the March on Washington, he was 34. I'm 33.
You know? John Lewis was, you know, barely in his 20s, right?
Angela Davis. Okay, why don't we take it to the continent? Kwame Nkrumah, Patrice Lumumba. You know, these brothers were 30s.
Young cats.
Young cats. Because they had an idea and a spirit and an energy and an enthusiasm, and were able to mobilize and build on the foundations of these, you know, and so it's not to take anything away from the folks who've been here doing this work. I think it's important, the foundation that the Durham Committee on the Black Affairs of Black People have laid, that the children and grandchildren of the you know, we inherit the legacy of Black Wall Street here. I stand on the shoulders of those pioneers. But you know, the purpose of standing on one's shoulders is so that you can continue to climb and lift as you climb. And I think I'm uniquely poised because of my age to do something that I don't know the other candidates are capable of doing, which is mobilizing millennials to get involved in the electoral process. What do we need in the state of North Carolina, the United States of America right now, is the base, that the most progressive base in America, to be mobilized, galvanized, and enthusiastic. Like, we need that beyond Durham. And so that's something I hope to be able to do intergenerationally, not just millennials. There's a lot of elders that are excited about the campaign as well.
And you think about the artist piece, you know, one grand example in an international scale, you think about someone like Fela Kuti, right, who's an artist who imagined himself as something larger. You think about the legacy of someone like Raz Baraka, you know, given his family in terms of you know, both his mother and his father, and also his position as a spoken word performer who's also then in the classroom, and then there's also a principal, and then translate that into the mayor of Newark. You think about somebody like Rhymefest in Chicago, right? Who, you know, who's been very much focused on those kinds of things. So there are models out there, you know, whether we're talking about your youth or your role as an artist. You know, what do you say to folks looking at this particular moment in terms of Donald Trump's presidency? We could think about the attacks on sanctuary cities, his immigration policy in general, the attacks on public education, right? When we think about Betsy DeVos, you know, Durham has a rich tradition of both public schools, and at least in the last 15 years, successful charter schools, right? Some of which have been recognized by Republican presidents, right? What do you say to a population, or how do you galvanize a population now to deal with the reality of what a Trump administration means, but how politics on the local, right, while in conversation with national politics, are really separate and distinct?
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction to make. Durham is to me the future city. We're a future city. There's no racial majority in Durham. We've got a kind of a quickly growing, you know, economy with some interesting elements. We also have the biggest income inequality, you know, in the state of North Carolina. We've got these issues, as I mentioned, 800 evictions a month. 40% of black and brown children are living in poverty. These are the issues that are not unique to Durham. These are the issues in cities and urban centers across the United States. And Durham has a unique opportunity to make a statement in this moment about the creative ways in which we address problems and come up with solutions that are outside of the box. Because there's one thing that we learned, you know, at the national level in this past election cycle, is that people are tired with the status quo and are looking for something different, because these entrenched systems have not been working for a lot of people. And so I think that you know, the personal is political. You know, we learned that from radical black feminists. And we know that you know, local politics are an important place to galvanize you know, political power for progressive movements. And that's exactly what conservatives did in 2008. You know, they went back to the drawing board. They came back in 2010. They came back with Amendment 1 in 2012. They smashed, you know, and now look at where we are.
We got the redistricting done,
you know,
even though it's under, you know, scrutiny, obviously.
So we need to take a grassroots approach to reclaiming power. And you know, the pendulum swings. I understand politics and history. All you have to do is look back to see how the trends can sway. But you know, make no mistake. You know, at the federal level, you mentioned Betsy DeVos and her assault on education, assault on immigrants. There's you didn't mention the assault on, you know, not only with ICE, but also the revamping of the war on drugs.
You know, Jeff Sessions.
Oh my goodness, we got some work to do.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? And the immediate work we need to do is with the Durham Police Department. You know, we can decide how the terms of engagement with ICE. We can decide, you know, how the directive from the war on drugs from Sessions coming down from the federal level is implemented on a grassroots level in our community. We have the power to make those demands and make those changes and listen to those organizers, the Fade Coalition, the Spirit Houses, the Harm-Free Zone. Like we have the agency to make those changes and those moves and to prioritize those organizing principles right here on the ground in Durham.
What do you say to some, and I'm thinking about what might be the largest stakeholder for you to consider, both here and also throughout the state, Duke. We understand what your appeal will be to millennials. We understand what your appeal will be to the creative class here in Durham. What your appeal would be to a multiracial working class
Yeah.
and working poor here in Durham. How do you bring a stakeholder like Duke to the table, particularly in the context where Duke almost functions in which it doesn't even take ownership for the amount that it's a stakeholder in a city like Durham? But how do you bring them to the table to deal particularly with these issues around inequality in the city of Durham?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and you know, particularly as a Carolina grad, that poses some challenges. But also as a townie, you know, I grew up in Durham, and have felt the rub with Duke students from when I was very young, and have seen how that privilege in that space, how a local can feel and like an alien in those, you know, in those spaces, and have been building with Duke students of color who
as almost as if Durham is a colonial outpost,
you know,
of the university.
yeah. So I think that you know, the Duke historically, just looking back at the relationships between the city and the university, you know, particularly with the lacrosse case, and how out of that came a liaison that they established to see about addressing that relationship. And so it took a crisis for that position to be created, and then there's an opportunity to you know, with that position, to go into some of the deeper, more entrenched elements that was just a, you know, side effect of. But I think there's an opportunity to you know, and again, I mean, there's another thing with the Bull City Connector. You know, the Bull City Connector is a collaboration with Duke. Where they've removed stops from the bus headquarters to convenience Duke students. You know, and this is something that is paid for 75% by Durhamites. And the most vulnerable people, now they have to go across 2 sets of train tracks to get to the closest stop on the Bull City Connect. So we need to have some conversations. We need to have some conversations. We need to get some more liaisons and put some money where our mouths are in terms of fostering a true exchange and dialogue, and looking for opportunities to build in places where we've seen best practices allow fruitful conversations and trust and solidarity to grow. And we need to hold Duke accountable in the places like the Bull City Connector, where it's like, okay, you know, we're glad that this is a partnership, but how do we make this work for the majority of the people who use and need this service? Not I'm saying need, you know, this is a free bus line. I mean, in my opinion, we need to make all the buses free. Bull City Connector needs to be the standard for all of our bus system. That's my transportation stance. But we're not there yet. And in the interim, people rely on the Bull City Connector. It needs to go deeper into East Durham than it currently does. And it needs to accommodate the most vulnerable Durhamites as well as the most privileged Durhamites.
People who need buses.
You know, and so that, you know, so I think there's some work to be done. But it involves building on best practices, strengthening the places where we have a really good, solid rapport. Another thing that comes to mind, the National Museum of Art, they do a Kids Day. After we did a big event in MacDougall Terrace, we were talking about how could we get some kids from the Mac to participate in the Free Kids Day that they do at the Nasher. You know, so I think that there will be because I'm an artist, I was able to have that, and on the board of the Nasher, I was able to, you know, to think about how that connection could be made. And there are other, like Nasher, unutilized opportunities for the community to get involved on campus and vice versa.
Duke performances.
Yes, there's more opportunity for that. And I think like someone like Baba Chuck Davis was a genius at that. He was a G at that. You know, rest in peace. One of my mentors and inspirations. But you know, I think culture has a unique opportunity to bridge that gap in ways that you can't do in other ways. So
we've been joined by Pierce Freelon, who's a candidate for mayor here in the city of Durham, a professor, creative, social entrepreneur. We wish you the best in your campaign, Pierce.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Black lights and booze burn when I record for Watts, and every black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot. All black everything black, culture over everything, y'all. We take it.